Well, many of you know my daughter, Amanda Achtman. She's been quite busy with her project, the Dying to Meet You project. I know some of you are quite excited to meet her. So Amanda's going to give us a little update, 10 minutes, a little update about what she's been up to since you saw her last here in Calgary.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be back in Calgary. I just flew in this morning from Regina. And one of the great joys of my life several years ago was studying John Paul II in Poland. I lived in Lublin, Poland, where John Paul II taught ethics for 25 years before he became Pope. And part of moving to Poland, which baffled many Poles why a Canadian would choose to Poland of all places, was to steep in an authentically Catholic culture. And even though it's Lent, I want to mention how much I was marked by the Corpus Christi processions in Europe. They're magnificent. And I mention this because just a couple months ago, I was praying before the Blessed Sacrament. And as I was at this morning of recollection, I started to imagine, what if we had such a procession as I saw in Poland, but through a retirement residence, through a nursing home. And I started to imagine, and my mind started to go with, and what if there were children who were ringing bells, the boys ringing bells and the girls dropping flower petals, processing through the home. And then I started to imagine some more, and I imagined that after such an event, maybe there's some resident of such a retirement home who one day is tempted to ask for euthanasia. But they look at their doorpost and they remember Christ in the care home. They remember the Corpus Christi in the care home type procession, and it revives their sense of worth that they had been visited. And so last week, this past week in Regina, at the invitation of Archbishop Bolin, we had the opportunity to do some of these apostolic experiments, including the Christ in the Care Home procession. We had a grade 4 class from St. Pius School come, and we had an intergenerational mass at 11 a.m. It was beautiful. The seniors and the students doing the different roles during the mass. Then there was a lunch in the residence, and the kids absolutely loved it. Some of them thought the retirement residence was like a castle, that they got soup and a choice of juice and a main meal and dessert. On their school day, they were thrilled. And then after that, I spent some time preparing them for this Eucharistic procession. And you can imagine that after their lunch, they were kind of bouncing off the walls. They were so energetic, and somehow I had to prepare them to process peacefully through a retirement residence for an hour to all 4 floors. Well, I caught their attention when I said to them, there are many people who live here who are sad, lonely, maybe someone they love very much has died, maybe they have cancer or disabilities, and the students immediately changed. I said, oh, that's sad. And they became very attentive, and I said, now Jesus is going to be processed through this residence, and he is counting on you to cooperate in making everyone's day. And so this is what we did. We had a cross bearer. We sang Jesus Remember Me through the halls. We had the boys at the front ringing bells, just as I had seen in Europe. And then we had all of the girls dropping flower petals. And then we had a deacon with the Blessed Sacrament. And before each door of each residence, he paused. And the residents had at first been a little bit ambivalent. The staff had wondered, well, what if not everyone is Catholic? We said, simply let them know in advance that this will be the hour that this is being done. And if people want to have their door closed, they can. And if they want to have them open, they can. And it was so moving to witness how people received Jesus coming to them in their residence. And the students noted that for some of these people, they had the sense that if ever there was a time to make an effort, to exert themselves, to get up, to bow, to kneel, to stand, whatever they could do, here was the moment, here was the time. So it was an absolute highlight of last week in Regina, but there were so many activities as well as part of this broader mission to prevent euthanasia and encourage hope. But I wanted to share that with all of you because you are the hardcore pro-lifers, who can feel free to take the checklist for the Christ in the Care Home event and maybe even make it happen locally. It's not that complicated. It takes a few meetings, building some goodwill, showing up, but the whole template is there. And I'm completely committed to continuing to pilot these experiments that add life to the church, life to the world, and that are not just a one-time event because of the inspiration that they give to others, but even when we do a one-time event, I have become so firmly convinced of their value, because how many times in the Gospels does Jesus do a one-off? You'd think with the multiplication of loaves and food that would be a really useful enterprise, or that changing water into wine, long-term strategy. But no, these things happen once. And all these encounters that Jesus has with people, there's a before and there's an after in their life because of a word, because of a touch, because of his gaze. And so don't be afraid to let your pro-life difference that you make be like the encounters that Jesus had with people, a look, a touch, and a gaze. Because as Pope Francis says, touching and looking at the face of Christ, this is what it means to give our life. And we can add, this is what it means to be pro-life. God bless.